The world ended not with a whimper, but with a cacophony of destruction that echoed across continents. Nuclear warheads detonated in major cities, followed by a pandemic that ravaged what remained of humanity. The survivors called it the Fall. 15 years later, what was once a thriving civilization had been reduced to scattered settlements desperately clinging to existence amid the ruins of the old world. Elias Kane stood on the weathered watchtower overlooking Sanctuary, the settlement he had helped build from the ashes of what was once a small suburban town in the Midwestern United States. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the reinforced walls made from salvaged materials, concrete blocks, corrugated metal, and repurposed vehicles. Beyond their protective barrier lay the wastes, a treacherous landscape of abandoned buildings, mutated wildlife, and roving bands of marauders who preyed on the weak. At 43, Elias carried the weight of Sanctuary on his broad shoulders. Gray streaked his once dark hair, and deep lines etched his weathered face, a map of the hardships he had endured since the fall. Before everything collapsed, he had been a structural engineer, skills that proved invaluable in their new reality. Now he was their leader, though he never asked for the role. Movement at the North Ridge, called Jerome, a young lookout with keen eyes. Single figure, coming in fast. Elias raised his binoculars, focusing on the distant shape racing across the barren landscape. The figure moved with inhuman grace, navigating the treacherous terrain with practiced ease. A long coat billowed behind them, and the last rays of sunlight glinted off something metallic covering their face. "It's Wraith," Elias said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "Open the gate." The name had begun as a whisper among Sanctuary's residents. The masked stranger had appeared 6 months ago, saving a scavenging party from an ambush by the Red Chain Gang. Since then, the silent warrior had become their unexpected guardian, appearing during moments of crisis only to vanish again once the danger passed. Wraith slipped through the gates just as they began to close, carrying a pack that undoubtedly contained valuable scavenge supplies. As always, the warrior's face remained hidden behind an ornate metal mask that covered everything except for piercing green eyes. No one knew if Wraith was man or woman. The baggy clothes and armor concealed any telling features, but Elias had begun to suspect the latter from subtle movements and build. "Any trouble out there?" Elias asked, knowing he wouldn't receive a verbal response. Wraith never spoke, communicating only through gestures and occasional handwritten notes. The masked figure shook their head, offering the pack to Elias. Inside were medical supplies, antibiotics, painkillers, and bandages, treasures in their resource-starved world. "Thank you," Elias said sincerely. "These will help Maria treat the children's fever." Wraith nodded once, then turned to leave. "Wait," Elias called. "Stay for the meal tonight. You've earned it." To his surprise, Wraith hesitated, then gave a slight nod of acceptance. It was the first time the mysterious guardian had agreed to join their community, even temporarily. As they walked toward the central courtyard where meals were shared, Elias noticed how the other residents reacted to Wraith's presence, some with gratitude, others with undisguised suspicion. Sophia, Sanctuary's head of security and Elias's close friend, approached with her hand resting casually on her holstered pistol. "Our ghost decided to grace us with their presence?" she asked, eyeing Wraith cautiously. "Wraith brought medicine," Elias replied. "The children will recover now." Sophia's expression softened slightly. "Then I suppose even specters deserve dinner." The meal was a simple stew made from cultivated vegetables and meat from trapped rabbits. Wraith sat at the edge of the gathering, slightly apart from the others, lifting the mask just enough to eat without revealing their face. Elias watched from across the courtyard, wondering about the person behind the metal facade. His thoughts were interrupted by the blaring of the perimeter alarm. "Raiders!" Jerome shouted from the watchtower. "Red Chain, at least 20, coming from the east." Everyone moved with practiced precision. Children and the elderly were ushered into the reinforced community center, while those capable of fighting grabbed weapons and took defensive positions. Elias grabbed his rifle and headed toward the eastern wall, where the attack would hit hardest. They've never come in such numbers, Sophia said as she checked her ammunition. Something's changed. Elias nodded grimly. They must be desperate or found new leadership. The first shots rang out as the raiders approached, firing wildly at Sanctuary's defenses. Elias took aim at a marauder carrying a makeshift flamethrower, the most dangerous threat to their wooden structures, and squeezed the trigger. The man fell, but others quickly advanced behind improvised shields made from car doors. They're organized, Elias muttered. This isn't a random raid. As the attackers reached the wall, grappling hooks sailed over the top, followed by the first raiders climbing up toward the defenders. Elias fired again and again, but they kept coming. A defender to his right screamed as a bullet found its mark, and the defensive line began to falter. Then Wraith was there, moving like a shadow among the defenders. The masked warrior fought with twin machetes, striking with lethal precision. When one of the raiders breached the wall and charged toward Elias with a spike club, Wraith intercepted in a blur of motion, deflecting the blow and countering with a fatal strike. The battle raged for nearly an hour before the raiders finally retreated, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Sanctuary had prevailed, but at a cost: 2 defenders dead, 7 wounded. As the survivors regrouped, Elias found Wraith kneeling beside one of the fallen raiders, examining something in their hand. "What did you find?" Elias asked. Wraith hesitated, then held out a small metal object, a badge or medallion with a familiar logo. Elias took it, his blood running cold as recognition dawned. The emblem belonged to Nexus Corporation, one of the largest technology companies before the fall. It was also the company where Elias had worked, designing secure facilities for their most classified projects. "Where did he get this?" Elias whispered, more to himself than to Wraith. The masked figure stood and pointed eastward toward the ruins of the city. "You think there are more of these at their camp?" Elias asked. Wraith nodded, then took the medallion back, turning it over to reveal a series of numbers etched on the reverse side, coordinates. That night, after the wounded had been treated and the dead prepared for burial, Elias sat alone in his quarters, a repurposed office in what had once been a small municipal building. The medallion lay on his desk, the coordinates pointing to a location deep within the ruins of the city, an area so dangerous that Sanctuary scavengers never ventured there. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The door opened to reveal Wraith, who slipped inside like a ghost. "You know something about this, don't you?" Elias asked. Wraith approached the desk, took a pencil and paper, and wrote in neat, precise handwriting. "You need to go there." "Why?" Elias questioned. "What's at these coordinates?" Wraith wrote again. "Answers about the fall." "About what happened?" Elias stared at the medallion. Nexus was just a technology company. They couldn't have caused. But even as he said it, memories surfaced of restricted areas, of rumors about government contracts and classified research. "What do you know about this?" he demanded. Wraith stood motionless for a long moment, then wrote, "I know you, Elias Kane. Senior Engineer, Nexus Corporation." Elias felt his heart pound against his ribs. "Who are you?" he whispered. But Wraith merely shook their head and wrote one final message before leaving. "When you're ready to learn the truth, I'll take you there." That night, Elias dreamed of the time before, of gleaming skyscrapers and crowded streets, of his office at Nexus Corporation with its view of the city skyline. But the dream twisted into nightmare as sirens wailed and people screamed, running from something he couldn't see. A woman's voice called his name, desperate and accusing, but he couldn't find her in the chaos. He awoke in cold sweat just before dawn, the medallion clutched in his hand. Whatever secrets lay buried in the ruins, he needed to face them. 3 days later, Elias stood at Sanctuary's gate with a backpack of supplies. Sophia confronted him as he was about to leave. "This is suicide, Elias," she said. "No one comes back from the deep ruins." "Wraith does," he countered. "Wraith isn't normal," Sophia hissed. "Have you ever wondered why they hide behind that mask? What they're really after?" "I trust them," Elias said, surprised to realize he meant it. "Your trust might get you killed," Sophia warned. "At least take some of our fighters with you." Elias shook his head. "The settlement needs protection, especially after the raid." I'll be back in a week. If not, he let the implication hang between them. Then you leave me no choice, Sophia said, her expression hardening. She turned and called out, Jerome, you're in charge until I return. You can't come, Elias protested. Watch me, she replied, shouldering her own pack. Someone needs to make sure your ghost doesn't lead you into a trap. They met Wraith at the rendezvous point, a collapsed highway overpass a mile for sanctuary. The masked figure's body language betrayed clear displeasure at seeing Sophia. Deal with it, Sophia said, interpreting the silent judgment. I go where he goes. Wraith acquiesced with a reluctant nod, then led them eastward toward the ruins of the city. They traveled cautiously, avoiding open spaces and keeping to the cover of derelict buildings and overgrown vegetation. The landscape grew increasingly alien as they approached the city. Mutated plants with unnatural colors twisted through crumbling concrete, and occasionally they spotted strange creatures scurrying in the distance. Radiation did this, Sophia asked as they passed a cluster of trees with bark that seemed to pulse with an internal glow. Radiation and whatever else was released during the fall, Elias replied. The old world was playing with forces it couldn't control. Wraith led them through the outskirts of the city with uncanny confidence, avoiding danger with preternatural awareness. Twice they froze at Wraith's signal, hidden in shadows as groups of scavengers or mutated predators passed nearby. By nightfall, they had penetrated deeper into the ruins than Elias had ventured since the early days after the fall. They made camp in an abandoned subway station, sealing the entrance with debris. As they ate a cold dinner, Elias noticed Wraith examining a faded advertisement on the wall, a poster for Nexus Corporation's flagship product, a neural interface called Synapse. You worked on that project, didn't you? Sophia asked, following his gaze. Elias nodded. Peripherally, I designed the secure labs where they developed the technology. It was supposed to revolutionize human-computer interaction. Instead, the world ended, Sophia said bitterly. Wraith approached them and handed Elias a worn photograph extracted from a hidden pocket. It showed a group of people in lab coats standing before a Nexus Corporation logo. Elias recognized himself, younger and smiling confidently at the camera. His finger traced across familiar faces until it stopped on a woman with bright green eyes and a brilliant smile. Dr. Alexandra Chun, he whispered. She led the Synapse project. Memories flooded back. Alexandra's passionate presentations about the potential of neural technology, her brilliant mind, the way they had grown close during late nights in the lab. Then came darker recollections, heated arguments about ethical boundaries, her growing concerns about military applications, his dismissal of her fears as paranoia. You knew her, Elias said to Wraith, a statement rather than a question. The masked figure took back the photograph, handling it with unmistakable tenderness before returning it to its hidden place. That night, as Sophia took first watch, Elias approached Wraith, who sat apart in the shadows. Was Alexander responsible? He asked quietly. For what happened? Wraith's hand moved to the mask momentarily, as if tempted to remove it, then dropped away. Instead, they wrote on a scrap of paper, "We all were." The next day brought them deeper into the ruins, where the devastation was most severe. Entire city blocks had been reduced to rubble, and strange crystalline formations grew from the debris like alien architecture. The air carried an acrid tang that their filtration masks barely mitigated. We'll need to move through the red chain territory, Wraith wrote, pointing to a section of the city ahead, where smoke rose from multiple sources. How many? Sophia asked. Wraith held up both hands twice. 20. Same group that attacked us. Elias questioned. Wraith nodded, then added, they found something. Something Nexus. They skirted the raiders' territory, moving through collapsed buildings and underground passages. Wraith's knowledge of the city seemed impossibly detailed, navigating paths that would have been challenging even before the destruction. As they crouched in the shell of an office building, watching raiders patrol nearby streets, Sophia whispered to Elias, how does Wraith know these routes? No one could map this chaos so precisely. Maybe they lived here, Elias suggested. Or maybe they're not what they seem, Sophia countered. Have you considered that Wraith might be leading us into a trap? The mask might be hiding more than a face. Elias glanced at Wraith, who knelt by a broken window, attention focused on the raiders' movements. I need to know what's at those coordinates, he said simply. They waited until nightfall before attempting to cross the most exposed section of their route, a broad avenue lined with the hollowed-out husks of skyscrapers. The raiders' campfires glowed in the distance as they moved from shadow to shadow. They were halfway across when floodlights suddenly blazed alive, illuminating them in harsh white light. "Run!" Elias shouted as gunfire erupted around them. They sprinted toward the nearest cover, a partially collapsed department store, as bullets struck the ground at their heels. Wraith pushed them forward, turning occasionally to throw small objects that exploded into clouds of dense smoke, obscuring their retreat. Inside the building, they raced through aisles of decayed luxury goods as raiders poured in behind them. Wraith led them toward a service corridor, but as they reached it, a portion of the ceiling collapsed, separating Elias from the others. "Elias!" Sophia called from the other side of the rubble. "Keep going," he shouted back. "I'll find another way." Gunfire forced him to retreat deeper into the store. He found himself in what had once been a jewelry department, display cases long since emptied by looters. Footsteps approached as raiders searched for him. Elias ducked behind a counter, clutching his rifle and controlling his breathing as he had learned to do during the many crises since the fall. A raider entered, scanning the room with a flashlight. Elias remained motionless, waiting for the man to pass. Instead, the raider approached the counter, as if drawn by instinct. Just as he was about to discover Elias, a shadow detached from the ceiling, Wraith dropping silently behind the man. The masked warrior subdued him with a swift, non-lethal strike. Wraith beckoned urgently, leading Elias through a labyrinth of back rooms and emergency exits until they emerged into an alley several blocks from the department store. "Sophia?" Elias asked breathlessly. Wraith pointed to a rendezvous point on a small map produced from a pocket, then urged him forward as distant shouts indicated the raiders were organizing a search. They reached an abandoned hotel where they found Sophia waiting, her arm bleeding from a grazing bullet wound. "What the hell happened back there?" she demanded as Elias helped bandage her injury. "They were waiting for us, like they knew we were coming. Someone might have followed us from Sanctuary," Elias suggested. Wraith shook their head and wrote, "They're guarding the path to Nexus. They know something valuable is there." "And what exactly is there?" Sophia pressed. Wraith hesitated, then wrote, "Project Rebirth. The contingency plan." "Contingency for what?" Elias asked. "For when humanity destroyed itself," came the written reply. They rested until dawn, then continued their journey with increased caution. The coordinates led them to what had once been the center of the financial district, now dominated by a massive crater where the Nexus headquarters had stood. Adjacent to the crater stood a smaller building that had somehow survived relatively intact, the Nexus Research Annex, where Elias had spent most of his working hours. "The entrance will be buried," Elias said as they surveyed the building from a safe distance. Wraith shook their head and led them not to the main entrance, but to an inconspicuous utility door at the back of the building. The door appeared ordinary, but when Wraith placed the medallion against a specific spot, a hidden scanner glowed briefly before the door unlocked with a hydraulic hiss. "How did you know about this?" Elias asked, astonished. This entrance wasn't in any of the blueprints. Wraith didn't respond, simply leading them inside. The interior was in remarkably good condition, preserved by backup systems that had somehow maintained minimal power and environmental control for 15 years. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim blue glow as they moved through silent corridors. "This place gives me the creeps," Sophia muttered. "Like everyone just vanished." "They did," Elias replied. "When the warning came, evacuation was immediate. I was inspecting a satellite facility in the mountains. By the time I made it back to the city, everything had already—" He trailed off as they reached a security door marked Project Rebirth, authorized personnel only. Beside it was a biometric scanner. Wraith gestured for Elias to place his hand on it. My clearance was revoked when I raised concerns about the project, Elias said. Wraith wrote, try. To Elias's surprise, the scanner recognized him, and the door slid open to reveal a large laboratory filled with advanced equipment. At the center stood a row of cylindrical chambers resembling medical pods, each connected to a central control system. All but one were empty, their glass covering shattered. What is this place? Sophia whispered. A nightmare, Elias replied, horror dawning as suppressed memories resurfaced. Project Rebirth was classified, even within Nexus. It was supposed to be humanity's insurance policy, a way to preserve key individuals in case of global catastrophe. He approached one of the broken pods, running his hand over the control panel. Cryogenic suspension combined with neural backup. The subjects would be preserved physically while their consciousness was maintained in a simulated environment. Subjects? Sophia echoed. You mean people volunteered for this? Not all of them, Elias said quietly. The military backers had their own list of essential personnel, scientists, military strategists, political leaders, people who would be needed to rebuild society in their image. He moved to the central console, which still showed signs of activity. Alexandra opposed it. She said we were creating an arc for the privileged while condemning everyone else. When she threatened to go public, his voice broke as the full memory returned. They decided she was too valuable to lose. Her neural architecture work was the key to the whole project. They planned to make her a subject against her will. Wraith had moved to the single intact pod at the end of the row. Unlike the others, this one was still operational, its systems humming quietly. The glass was frosted over, obscuring whatever or whoever was inside. Is someone in there? Sophia asked, approaching cautiously. Elias checked the console. The system is running some kind of diagnostic cycle. It's preparing for... He stopped, staring at the screen in disbelief. It's preparing for subject awakening. The protocol was triggered by our entry. A mechanized voice suddenly echoed through the laboratory. Authorized personnel detected. Subject revivification process initiated. Estimated completion, 3 minutes. As the pod began to emit a soft hum, raiders burst into the laboratory, guns raised. Don't move, shouted their leader, a scarred man with cybernetic implants visible at his temple. Step away from the pod. Elias raised his hand slowly. What do you want with this place? The tech, the leader replied. Do you have any idea what working pre-fall medical technology is worth? Especially something that can keep someone alive for 15 years. You don't understand what this is, Elias warned. I understand enough, the raider sneered. My employers want whatever's in that pod, and they're willing to pay handsomely for it. Employers? Sophia questioned. Who could possibly? The leader silenced her with a threatening gesture. The old world never completely died, woman. Some people just went underground with their power intact, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Wraith had been motionless throughout the exchange, seemingly assessing the situation. Without warning, the masked warrior suddenly moved, throwing a small device that exploded in a blinding flash of light. In the confusion, Wraith attacked with terrifying efficiency, disarming the closest raiders and using their own weapons against them. Elias and Sophia joined the fight, taking cover behind equipment as gunfire tore through the laboratory. Bullets struck the central control system, causing alarms to blare as the revivification process became unstable. The pod is going critical, Elias shouted over the chaos. If it ruptures, whatever chemical compounds are inside could kill us all. Wraith fought toward the pod, intent on stabilizing it, but took a bullet to the shoulder in the process. Despite the injury, the masked warrior continued forward, reaching the control panel and inputting commands with practiced familiarity. As the last raiders fell or retreated, Elias and Sophia joined Wraith at the pod. The warrior was wounded in multiple places now, blood seeping through clothing, yet still working desperately to stabilize the system. Let me help, Elias said, attempting to take over, but Wraith pushed him back. The pod's glass cover suddenly retracted, releasing a cloud of cryogenic vapor. As it dissipated, Elias stared in shock at the figure inside, a woman in her 30s with delicate features, her body preserved exactly as it had been 15 years ago. "Alexandra," he whispered. Before he could process the revelation, more raiders poured into the laboratory, led by their cybernetically enhanced leader. He took aim at Elias with a high-powered rifle. "Step away from the pod," he commanded. Wraith moved within human speed, placing their body between Elias and the weapon. The raider fired, and the bullet struck Wraith squarely in the chest with such force that the masked warrior was thrown backward into Elias's arms. Sophia returned fire, driving the raiders temporarily back into the corridor. "We need to move. Now." But Elias couldn't leave, not with Wraith bleeding in his arms and Alexandra seemingly alive in the pod. He dragged Wraith behind a console as Sophia covered them. "Stay with me," he urged the fallen warrior, whose breathing had become labored and ragged behind the mask. Wraith's gloved hand weakly reached up, grasping Elias's collar and pulling him closer. For the first time, Elias heard Wraith's voice, a hoarse, feminine whisper damaged by years of disuse. "Remove my mask," she gasped, "and you'll finally know who I really am." With trembling hands, Elias reached for the mask, feeling for the clasps that held it in place. As he released them, the metal face covering came away, revealing the face beneath, older, scarred, but unmistakable. Alexandra Chun gazed up at him with those same green eyes he remembered, now filled with pain and something else. "Forgiveness." "Alexandra," he breathed, confusion overwhelming him. "But you're—" His eyes darted to the pod, where an identical face lay in suspended animation. "A backup," Alexandra whispered. "Neural architecture. 2 bodies, 1 consciousness split. Half here, half preserved. Insurance against failure." Understanding crashed over Elias. "You escaped before they could fully force you into the program." She nodded weakly. "But not before they started the process. I sabotaged it. Incomplete transfer. Escaped with half myself. Left half behind. You've been protecting me all this time," Elias realized. "Why? I failed you. I didn't believe your warnings." "Because you tried," she whispered. "At the end, you tried to stop them. I saw you, fighting to reach me before the bombs fell." Tears streamed down Elias's face as the memory returned fully. His desperate race back to the city after hearing Alexandra's warning, his failed attempt to reach the Nexus building before military forces secured it, the nuclear detonation that forced him to flee. "I never stopped looking for you," he confessed. "I know," she replied, her voice growing fainter. "I had to stay hidden. They're still out there. The ones who caused the fall, waiting to rise again." A violent explosion shook the laboratory as the raiders breached the inner doors. Sophia fired her last rounds, then shouted, "They're coming through. We need to go now." Alexandra gripped Elias's hand with surprising strength. "The other me," she gasped. "Take her. The data. In her mind. Evidence. Truth about what really happened." "I'm not leaving you," Elias insisted. Alexandra smiled sadly. "You never did. That's why I found you again." Her hand reached in her pocket, extracting a small device. "This will overload the facility's reactor. 30 seconds after activation. Will destroy everything they want. And me with it." "No," Elias protested. "One Alexandra is enough for this broken world," she whispered. "She is me, without the pain, without 15 years of survival and vengeance. Better this way." With a final surge of strength, she pressed the device into his hand. "Go. Live. Find the truth. Stop them from finishing what they started." Sophia appeared beside them, helping to lift the Alexandra from the pod, who remained unconscious but breathing steadily. "We have to move now." With his heart shattering, Elias pressed his lips to the dying Alexandra's forehead. "I will finish what you started," he promised. Her eyes, those brilliant green eyes that had haunted his dreams for 15 years, held his gaze one last time. "I know," she whispered. As raiders poured into the laboratory, Elias activated the device, then carried the unconscious Alexandra through a maintenance tunnel that Wraith, the other Alexandra, had shown them earlier. Behind them, the facility erupted in flames and explosive decompression, burying secrets and pursuers alike. 3 days later, Elias stood on Sanctuary's wall, watching the eastern horizon where smoke still rose from the ruins of the city. Beside him, Sophia kept silent vigil. Will she remember? Sophia finally asked. When she wakes up, Elias glanced toward the infirmary where the Alexander from the pod remained in a recovery coma, her body slowly adjusting to awakening after 15 years of suspension. Maria thinks her memories will be fragmented at first. She'll remember her life before the fall, but not what came after. Not what the other Alexander did for you, Sophia noted. Not the years she spent as Wraith, watching over you, waiting for the right moment. Maybe that's a blessing, Elias said quietly. To awaken without the burden of those years, without the pain and solitude, but also without the strength those years forged, Sophia countered. The question is, will you tell her? Elias touched the medallion that now hung around his neck, the one Wraith had carried for 15 years. Eventually, when she's ready, she deserves to know who she was, who she still is somewhere inside. And the people who sent the raiders? The ones who caused the fall? Sophia asked. They're still out there, Elias replied, his expression hardening. And now we know they're active again. Whatever they were planning 15 years ago, they're preparing to finish it. You think we can stop them? A handful of survivors against whatever remains of the old power structures. Elias looked down at the medallion, then toward the infirmary where Alexander rested. One woman who had been willing to sacrifice everything twice to expose the truth. We have what they don't, he said. We have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. As the sun set over Sanctuary, casting long shadows across the settlement, Elias made a silent promise to the woman who had died in his arms. The woman who had spent 15 years behind a mask, protecting him, guiding him toward the truth. He would not waste her sacrifice. The world had ended once before. He would not let it happen again. In the infirmary, unnoticed by anyone, Alexandra Chen's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, brilliant green and filled with purpose, before closing again as her mind continued to heal, fragments of memory beginning to coalesce. In her dreams, she saw a metal mask and felt the weight of it against her face, heard the whisper of her own voice saying words she didn't remember speaking. Remove my mask, and you'll finally know who I really am.